God is not mind, but he is the cause of mind's being. He is not spirit, but the cause of spirit's being. And he is not light, but the cause of light's being. Reincarnation, a primal androgynous man, cosmic spheres, all these are part of a hermetic world view. It's a lot, but we can start slowly. The Neoplatonic philosopher Iamblichus described a way of Hermes that supposed Hermeticists engaged in. However, that's not much to go on. It does seem as though the texts of the Hermetica were based around an initiatory practice that the student goes through for further and higher spiritual revelation and truth. In fact, even though we do not know in which order we can read the Hermetica or the Corpus Hermeticum, some scholars argue that they were structured according to the different levels of spiritual attainment of the initiate. And while this might suggest something like the Eleusinian mysteries, in which students were initiated into mystery cults, most scholars argue that the Hermeticists were not as organized or institutionalized. The massive breadth of beliefs by Hermeticists suggests something similar to this, especially when you consider the fact that this was a highly syncretic religious and philosophical atmosphere. In most texts, Hermes Trismegistus teaches his own students like Tat or Asclepius. However, in the first text of the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes Trismegistus himself is taught by Poimandres. Poimandres is identified to a certain extent with God or Nous. Now, there's no exact way to define the word nous, however it's related to concepts such as mind or intellect. There is one nous, according to Hermeticists, making Hermeticism a monistic worldview, meaning that there is one deity or God. One of the most notable aspects of Hermeticism is how they view the human being. Humans are viewed as the microcosm of the macrocosmic God, meaning that through spiritual attainment, the human will come to realize that they are, to a certain extent, God. By having the initiate ascend through heavenly spheres into the spiritual pleroma, similar to something like Gnosticism, which we will discuss later on, the initiate realizes that they are God incarnate. This is because the initiate comes to realize their divine true nature through Gnosis, which is direct experience of the divine pleroma, as opposed to episteme, which is kind of philosophical knowing. As how the human being came to be encapsulated in a material body differs according to different hermetic texts and or authors. Some have a very negative view of the material world, which is more in line with Gnosticism. However, other texts view the natural world as a beautiful emanation of God. In Hermeticism, you get this dual idea of the human being as having a material reality controlled by the heavenly spheres and fate, and their truer essential nature as a god. Some Hermetic texts, like the Poimandres, have this sexual union between a primal androgynous human being and nature, which is very often viewed as more feminine, and this leads to a dual nature of the human being. So while the human being is controlled by the heavenly spheres while still alive on earth, they can still attain a level of spiritual freedom by ascending through these spheres and escaping the strings of fate. You might already have an idea as to how radically heretical this might sound to a traditional Christian outlook. I want to give an important reminder and disclaimer that these are not my beliefs, these are what the Hermeticists seemed to have believed. It's very complicated. Now I'm not going to dive fully into Hermetic belief because there are a lot of resources out there that you can access which are much more knowledgeable in this subject than I am. Instead, I'm going to fast forward into 1400s Florence to show how Hermeticism and other forms of old knowledge impacted debates within Christian circles. We're going to see how the lines between Christian and pagan were very much blurred in ways that today might seem very counterintuitive. What Catholics and Protestants are going to arrive at in terms of opinion is going to be very surprising, to say the least. Once again, I am basing a lot of my work on Hermetica by Brian P. Copenhaver. He has a very good introduction as well as the Corpus Hermeticum itself. However, I'm also basing it on Esotericism and the Academy by Wouter Hanegraaff. So in the next episode, we're going to see how this influence of Hermeticism and all traditional knowledge is going to lead to the development of an esoteric worldview, how it was shunned by history, and how it was reincarnated in spiritual New Age circles, but one step at a time. Thank you for watching another episode of TeaSoteric.